This is Screencast 5 for Chapter 2, and in it we will look at the unique properties of water. This is a concept that you will need to understand. There are 6 unique properties to consider. We'll go through each of those, describe what they are, and then talk about why each of these properties, which is unique to water, makes a difference to life on Earth. The first one is surface tension. So remember we talked about how water molecules are attracted to one another because of the slight negative and positive charges between the hydrogen and the oxygen in different molecules. One of the results of this is surface tension. Surface tension is because the water molecules are attracted to each other most strongly at the surface of a body of water. And it doesn't just happen at the surface of a body of water. Picture a bathroom sink where you might turn the water on very slowly and it drips out of the faucet. Drip, drip. Well, each of those water droplets is held together by the same type of property, the cohesion. Now, in terms of why that's important to life on Earth, mainly it's due to the lifestyle or the life cycle of insects. Insects are very important and the most numerous part of our living species on Earth. They can be small and light and depend on surface tension in order to conduct their lifestyle. In other words, they can walk on the surface because of this. And also eggs can be laid at the surface, and that way that helps protect maybe from certain predators or helps in getting them to be fertilized, for example. So surface tension was one unique property of water. A second one is similar. It's capillary action. And in this case, instead of water molecules being attracted just to one another, they're even more strongly attached or attracted to a surface, such as a glass tube in this example. And so the water molecules, if you've ever done this in a chemistry lab, maybe put a glass capillary tube in some water, and you'll see the water rises up through the tube higher than its surface level. And you'll also notice that there's a meniscus, a little curve, a little dip here. And that's because the attraction of the water molecules to the plastic or glass, to that smooth surface, is stronger than to one another, so it sort of creeps up the sides there and you get that meniscus. So think for a minute on your own why capillary action is absolutely crucial to life on Earth. And I'll give you a hint, it has to do with plants. Plants don't have a pump like humans have a heart. And our heart pumps our blood throughout our bodies, bringing us oxygen and nutrient and removing waste like CO2. So in the case of plants, since there isn't a type of circulatory system, they rely on bringing water and nutrients from the roots out through the soil, up all the way through the root to the stem and then out to the leaves. And also in the other direction for storing food that is dissolved in the water and then returning that to things such as the roots. So the water movement is caused by capillary action. So as the plant has water in the soil, it draws it up through capillary action and eventually goes through the entire plant. This is something that we'll talk about a little further later. The third unique property of water is its boiling point, and the fourth is its freezing point. Okay, so life on Earth depends on having at some point in time water as a liquid. At all points in time, somewhere, we need to have water as a liquid. And the Earth is a fair distance from the sun, and it's going to have a certain temperature at which water, like all chemicals, all liquids, has a boiling point and a freezing point. Now, as it so happens, water's boiling point is 100 degrees C or 212 Fahrenheit. And if it boiled, let's say, at a lower temperature, if it boiled at, let's say, 70 degrees, when it's 70 degrees, the water would boil and boil and boil, and eventually we would not have any water left on Earth. So its boiling point is important. The second number is second point of these two is the freezing point. So water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees C. And that freezing point is also important. And we'll talk a little more about what happens to water when it reaches its freezing point. But the key here for both boiling and freezing is that it does not, if it all froze, let's say its freezing point was above 0 degrees C, above 32 degrees C. Let's say it froze at, again, let's say 100 degrees. Then the Earth would turn into a solid ice cube, right? Because it wouldn't have enough time, enough temperature at a warmer level to melt. Okay, moving on to point number 5. Water is a solvent. Think of the word solve or dissolve. Dissolve is something. So water is a solvent, which means things readily dissolve in it. All kinds of things, acids, bases, all kinds of things dissolve very readily in water. Some of the things that dissolve readily in water that affect life on Earth are nutrients. If nutrients weren't able to be dissolved in water very readily, then they would not be able to be distributed throughout the plant, for example, and also throughout our bodies. For example, blood is mostly water with some other items in it that are dissolved in it. And again, that brings nutrients or necessary gases to all of the cells of our body. Now, on the negative side, can you think of a negative factor that would occur as a result of water being a very good solvent? So take a minute to think about a negative consequence of this unique property of water. So in addition to good things such as nutrients dissolving in the water, bad things such as pollutants that are harmful or toxic also dissolve very readily in water. And so that could be a negative consequence of this particular property. All right, so next we're going to look at a very unique property of water. You may have noticed that ice floats, right? You can have an iceberg, you can have ice cubes in your drink, etc. So why does it float in water? So water, typically any molecule, is most dense at its freezing point. So a molecule might look something like, a bunch of molecules look something like the top picture. And then as it gets colder and colder, the temperature decreases, the molecules get closer and closer together. And typically for every other molecule that I believe has ever been studied, the resulting ice is at its most dense point when it's at its freezing point. But water is very strange. So here we have water, and it's getting colder and colder and colder. And even though its freezing point is 0 degrees, it reaches its maximum density at 4 degrees. And then as it goes below 4 degrees down to its freezing point at 0 degrees, it actually expands. And you know this from just your kitchen. If you put water in an ice cube tray and you freeze it, if you overfill your ice cube tray, when you take your ice cubes out of the freezer, they will have expanded, right? So why does this have importance to life on Earth? So to understand this property's importance to life on Earth, think about, say, the ponds here on Cape Cod. And think about how they freeze over in the winter and how they melt as we move into spring and summer. So take a minute on your own to think about that. So when your pond freezes over in the winter, if ice didn't float, that ice would then sink to the bottom of your pond. And the next season, the next winter, more ice would form and it too would sink to the bottom of the pond. Eventually, you would have ice throughout your pond because it wouldn't have enough at the surface to melt each season. In addition, if anyone's ever done ice fishing, you might know that living things such as fish are actually protected by the layer of ice at the surface and continue to live quite happily underneath that ice sheet. So those are two considerations when looking at the importance of this property. All right, I think this is where I'm going to, one more slide and then we'll pause it. Okay, just one other factor, just a little information about chemicals, and this is acids, bases, and their measurement, which is pH. An acid is a substance that contributes positive hydrogen atoms to a solution. A base is a substance that contributes negatively charged hydroxide ions to a solution. You can see if you put them together and they were equally balanced, you would have something neutral water, right? H2 and then the O. Okay, so pH is the way we indicate the strengths of acids and bases. And it's a logarithmic scale. So let's look at what that means. Here in the middle is a neutral pH, which is 7. If we move, let's say, down to a 6, any material with a pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than pure water. And then if we move down to 5, that's something with a pH of 5, it's 10 times more acidic than pH of 6, and it's 100 times, or 10 times 10, more acidic than 7. So you can see as you go down, it's each time it goes 10-fold, 100-fold, and then 100 times 100-fold, etc. Let's see, environmental science examples. Well, there's one right here, and that's acid rain. So pure water may have a pH of 7. Normal rainwater is slightly acidic, about maybe a little less than 6, and that's because it has certain materials dissolved in it, which make it slightly acidic, but that's normal. But then as you add pollutants, they dissolve in water and make it even more acidic, and then it becomes acid rain, acid meaning it's rainwater, but it's more acidic. And you can see it's even more than 10 times more acidic than normal rainwater. And that has very detrimental consequences for plants, for rock material, for many, many things that we'll talk about in future chapters. Okay, so that's a wrap for this screencast.